The video might be frozen.
For as long as people have called this place home, they've been welcomed with clean air, clean water, and an abundance of nature. As time went on, people saw the need to balance how we build cities with how we protect farms and forests. That's why across Greater Portland, in 24 cities and 3 counties, there's one metro government that brings us all together to maintain that vital balance, to provide services across cities and counties, to create a better future together. Hello, we're Metro. We plan for housing, jobs, and safe transportation. We protect land, air, and water by managing garbage and recycling. We support arts and culture by overseeing local venues to keep the economy growing. And we connect people to nature across 17,000 acres of parks and trails and at the Oregon Zoo. Metro is all of us working together, connecting how we live today with how we plan for the future. Hello, we're Metro, and so are you.
Great. Today is October 24th. We have a quorum. I will call our Metro Council work session to order. And Connor, could you take roll for attendance?
Yes, thank you. Councillor Wong.
Present.
Councillor Nolan.
Present.
Councillor Simpson.
Present.
Councillor Rosenthal.
Present.
Councillor Gonzalez.
Present. Good morning.
Good morning. And Deputy Council President Lewis and President Peterson is excused today.
Well, I'm present. Can we do the safety video?
Hi, I'm John Rourke. I'm the head carpenter here at the Newmark Theater. Safety is a big part of my job. Some of the things we consider here at the Newmark Theater are the safety of our crews, the safety of the cast, the safety of the audience. I'm out here at the Newmark Theater. You're at Metro Regional Center. The council chamber is located on the 3rd floor of the building. In event of fire or a fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room, go down the steps to the 2nd floor, and then exit through the main entrance by the reception desk and gather in the courtyard outside that entrance. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify a security agent at the front desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from the reception desk down to Grand Avenue. Thank you.
Okay. Today, our item on the agenda is the 2040 Planning and Development Grants Program Evaluation and Updates. Our work session today is an opportunity for council to provide input on concepts for updating the program, and staff is seeking direction on which concepts to further develop for additional discussion and future approval. Remember, we were briefed last week on the actual grants from this current cycle, so this is looking forward to future cycles. We have with us Melly Wilkinson, our Equitable Development and Investment Program Manager, Aaron Key, our Metro Urban Policy and Development Manager, and Sarah Brickstone, our 2040 Grants Manager, who will present and receive our feedback.
Good morning, Council. We're happy to be here 2 weeks in a row to get to talk about the 2040 Planning and Development Grants. So again, thank you for endorsing the 17 grants that we brought to you last week for the first cycle since COVID. We really appreciated the conversation, and staff is beginning to work with our local partners to develop scopes of work on those grants. Connor, I think we have a slideshow.
Yes, it's shared on screen now.
Okay,
there
great.
we go.
Okay, so I'm Malou Wilkinson, Equitable Development and Investment Program Director here in Metro's Planning, Development, and Research Department. And today, as you heard from Deputy Council President Lewis, we're here to share ideas. We promised we'd come back to you with ideas on how to improve the 2040 Planning and Development Grant Program to really best address the needs of our local partners today. So I wanted, if you can, next slide please. We want to start with just a little bit of history regarding the 2040 Planning and Development Grant Program. It was established in 2006 with a focus on expansion areas. And it really, it was an interesting coming together of different interest groups that created this program. The home builders were really frustrated that areas that had been newly brought into the urban growth boundary were not being planned, and our cities didn't have the funds to plan them. And so together, we created this fund with a tax on construction excise, a construction excise tax on new development across the region to really focus on funding the planning in new urban areas. And that was the focus on our first set of grants. In 2017, we had evolved the program over time to also have a focus on funding the planning work that was necessary inside the urban growth boundary in our existing communities, in town centers and along corridors to support development that is consistent with our region's 2040 vision. And in 2017, we had program updates that were really trying to respond to the housing crisis that unfortunately we're still in a housing crisis, but and also to make some adjustments to respond to Metro's strategic plan to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion. And it wasn't, throughout that whole time from 2006 to 2018, the program, the tax had to be renewed. In 2018, the tax was made permanent. And so the last time there were changes made to the program was in 2019 and 2020. And that at that point in time, we took what had been a relatively simple program and we were trying to provide more specificity. We established 4 different grant categories. We put in some limits on the number of applications that could be submitted by cities and counties. We also included a rule that grants couldn't pay for local staff time. We established a community partnership requirement for our grants. And we also added economic development and community stabilization to the Metro Code that refers to the 2040 Planning and Development grants. And over the last 3 years, really, we had both staff changes and we've had a lot of conversations with our local partners about what works, what the challenges are in applying for these grants and implementing these grants. And so we have a whole new team that is really excited to talk about some ideas for potential changes. And with that, I want to turn it over to Erin, but just to remind you all, what we're looking for is your discussion, advice, and guidance on which of these ideas you want us to pursue implementation, and then we would come back to you for I guess, codification of any of these ideas. So this is an exciting opportunity to talk about the program. All right.
Thanks, Malou. Thank you, everyone. I'm Erin Key, Urban Policy and Development Manager. I use she, her pronouns. And my job is to set the context a little bit today. So to just reiterate what Malou said, we're here to get feedback on some initial ideas to see which ones you like and those that you want us to work on more as a team. I'm gonna spend a little time going over the outreach we did to get information from our grantees and others outside of Metro about how this program could serve them better. And then I will pass it to Sarah Breakstone, our program manager, in order to talk about some of these new ideas that we have and get your feedback about them. Next slide. So as a review, the 2040 Planning and Development Grant Program is really focused on how to remove barriers for development and redevelopment. It focuses, as Malou said, in its birth was about serving areas on the edge of the region, making sure that they were ready and poised to accept development as soon as they were brought into the urban growth boundary, and it continues to serve that really important purpose. But in addition, it is also about removing barriers to development inside the growth boundary. It's about supporting economic growth as well as housing, promoting planning for equitable communities. This was an important adjustment that's happened over the course of the program's life, as Malou talked about. And overall, to support the implementation of the 2040 growth concept. So that involves, of course, working with planning departments to do good planning work with their communities inside and along the outside of the urban growth boundary. These are the goals that are at the heart of the program. Next slide. So as Malou said, also, we have new staff. I'm one of them. And so, of course, we've come in with excitement about the program and thought about ways that it could work best. And we decided to start doing some conversations outside of the building to get feedback about that. We did a survey that we emailed out to all of the planning directors at cities and counties in the region, and you're seeing some of the results on the screen. We got 22 responses to that online survey, but we also have been having one-on-one conversations. Malou and I have been traveling to several of the cities and counties around the region to talk to their planning directors and have conversations about their priorities and what's important to them. And we've been asking them about this grant program as well to get additional feedback. So overall, what we've learned is that there are several things that are working very well. Our grantees are thankful for the Metro staff support and resources that this grant provides. They're pretty happy with the funding levels. Project accountability in terms of what's asked of them, as well as our program's transparency and accountability outside of Metro's offices, and the community partnerships that our grants have encouraged. Next slide, I'll talk a little bit about what some of the challenges are that we heard about. The grant cycle timing was mentioned as a barrier. It has been an annual program for the most part, except in the last couple of years with COVID and staff changes where we got a little behind. But typically it's been a one-year cycle. We heard feedback about it, our cycle's not always aligning well with internal budgeting. So if we come too late in the budgeting process, then our funds can't build on what the cities or counties already have in place, or it has to wait longer to catch up with that cycle. We heard a lot about staff capacity. This is probably one of the ones we hear the most, which is that it takes staff effort and time to manage a grant, even if the grant is going to consultants or to community partners to do a lot of the work. There's still internal work that's required. We've also heard, as we were asking cities and counties about their goals, we heard planners talk about goals to do code improvements, to remove barriers to development and to help facilitate the development of more housing, for example. And some of that code work is really internal and requires staff time. They can support consultants, but they also need to spend a lot of staff time. And we haven't been, this grant program has not been allowed to provide funds for staff. The community partner requirement has been an impediment to some grants, depending on what they're doing. There isn't always a clear community partner. So we've worked with them to be flexible about defining that requirement and helping them figure out their best way to engage community, even if it's not the prescriptive way that our grant program tells them to. So we heard about kind of a desire to have a little more flexibility about how to do engagement in their communities. Our criteria, while we opened up more grant categories, actually led to some of our criteria being more confusing. So we heard this both from grantees who are trying to decide if their work qualifies for a grant and they couldn't understand our criteria, and from our own steering committee, our grant committee, who evaluates these grants, that they're having a hard time understanding the criteria. And honestly, sometimes staff struggles to understand our criteria. Another complaint has been about scoping delays. You would be surprised how long some of these grants take. They often start out being ideally 2 or 3 years in time, and some have gone 6. And so we wanted to think a lot about how we can facilitate this money getting out the door and being used effectively with program improvements. So we can go to the next slide, and I'm gonna hand it over to Sarah.
Before hand it off, can Councilor Wong ask his clarifying question?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Oh, just, yeah, some quick clarifying question. What do the percentages on the bottom mean? Like is it 20% of respondents didn't support that? I'm just, wondering what the part of that means.
Sorry, excuse me. That is, percentage of respondents that indicated that element was something that worked well in the program or something they appreciated about the program. And then the other slide, it's number of respondents that indicated that this particular item was a barrier for them.
So even on the first slide, like only 60% of respondents said that we received support or receive the necessary support?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. And keep in mind, it was a pretty low number of respondents.
Right.
So sometimes hard to find a way to present the information in a way that I think makes sense, but yeah.
Okay. And then just another clarifying question. What are the specific, like, legal requirements for the construction excise tax? Like, I know we put a bunch of, like, parameters on it, but does the construction excise tax come in as, like, general fund dollars, or, like, do they have to be used for a specific purpose?
The CET funds, sorry, I'll try to answer on any clarification. The CET funds are only used for the 2040 grant program. Is that what you were getting at?
Yeah, but is that by, like, because we said that, or is that by code or
Per our code.
per our code?
Yeah.
There's a section of code that has the rules about how the funds can be used. And then we have, on top of that code, a set of administrative rules that can be amended by our COO that have much more specific directions. That's where we, in the last set of changes that Malou mentioned, we added additional grant categories, for instance. That was done in the administrative rules. They're a lot more detailed than the code itself.
And then, I guess, are there like statutory requirements from a state, like the state code or something? It's like, because it seems like we've created that code on our own, so we could potentially, I'm not saying that we would, but we could just be like, we're not gonna do 2040 planning grants anymore. We're gonna use all the construction excise taxes on something else. Is that?
It is not state statute. It is established by code, but I'll hand it over to you in terms of how much we could just use the money for something else.
Yeah, thank you. Councilor Huang, I actually would want to come back to council in terms of, and sort of trace, as staff has indicated, this program, started in, I can't remember, so 2000s, and has been amended in code and in our administrative rules several times. So I'd be happy to come back with council with more information about sort of the flexibility that we have to make changes in our code, but I don't want to answer on the cuff right now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just asking just because if we're looking at changes, like, I'd like to know how flexible they can be and what restrictions we've imposed
Yeah.
on ourselves kind of.
I can add a little about that too. We're going to present to you some ideas that we believe can be changed with administrative rule changes. And if there were a situation where we wanted to talk about something that would need to be changed in the code, then we would come back to you and talk to you about what the requirements would be to make that change possible with the statutory changes. But you do have the ability to change the code as well as the administrative rules, and previous councils have made changes to the code.
Correct.
Counselor Nolan, clarifying questions?
Yes, just to do the simple arithmetic, if you've got 22 respondents, 60% represents only 12 people, just so that we put that in context. But I have a question too. And this may be something you don't have in your hip pocket. I'm interested in where the revenue comes from geographically. In particular, at least 2 cities in the region don't touch the urban growth boundary. That would be Portland and Maywood Park. Maybe there are a few others. But I would bet that Portland is the lion's share of the revenue. Do you have a split?
Counselor Nolan, I'm not sure if we have the exact split of where the money comes from, but we can get that for you. But I do know that the fact that so much of the revenue was coming from Portland was one of the reasons that while this was initially focused on only planning for new urban areas, there was a shift to be able to spend dollars inside to support development as well. And that was partially driven by the fact that so much of the revenue was coming from Portland, and Portland did not have any expansion areas.
Thank you. I'd appreciate a quick written update so that I can put it in my brain.
We can do that.
Thanks, Malou. Thanks, Madam
Counselor
President.
Nolan, I have those numbers. I don't have them in my head. I have them on my computer, but I can quickly give you a snapshot maybe
Thanks.
after we're done here.
Thank you much. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you. I will add Milwaukee and Gladstone as significant cities that don't touch UGB.
Okay, thanks.
Let's keep going.
Okay. All right, so we're gonna turn the presentation to talk about what some of our ideas are. Can you go back one, though? Yeah.
entirely contained.
But I want to frame these up in that, based on what we heard and based on our experience, these are the goals of the refinements we're gonna present to you today. It's about being responsive to our grantees. It's about effectiveness, using the funds effectively, so that's where talking about getting the funds out the door. It's also involved in streamlining the process for our applicants, streamlining the process for our selection committee, and frankly, streamlining the process for us, so that we can use a small staff to get these funds out the door and to provide flexibility to adapt over time. Obviously, the program's been an evolving one since it was created, and we don't want to stop that evolution. We want to be part of it and lead to additional improvements and changes over time as well. So now I'll hand it over to Sarah to get into some of the details of how we're working towards these goals.
Thanks, Erin. I'm Sarah Breakstone, manager of the 2040 Planning and Development Grant Program. We've got like kind of 5 big ideas to present to you today, and so I'll try to walk through each of them as concisely as possible and give you just sort of a glimpse of the pros and cons of each, and hopefully leave time for as much discussion as you need. The first concept is probably the one that I'm the most excited about, which is this idea of rolling cycles. With this approach, applicants would be able to submit applications at any time. And we would review and evaluate and make awards on a quarterly basis rather than an annual or even potentially longer basis. With this, we could also consider offering what I'm calling quick response grants. These would be small, maybe $10,000 to $20,000 grants to help people get ready to apply, help them develop project scopes and bring their applications closer to sort of ready to go status. Next slide, please. So this approach obviously provides a lot of flexibility and timing for our potential applicants, which is something that we heard a lot about when we were doing outreach and when we did the survey, the flexibility and timing. This would address that concern. It would allow us to theoretically, we would be reviewing fewer applications at a time, which would allow us to streamline, our process a little bit. I think with this approach, we would also be able to focus more on project readiness. I think along with this approach comes some refinement to our grant criteria to make them more clear, more approachable, more concise, and really integrate that element of readiness that I think has sometimes been missing from grant projects in the past. There's also I think, perception of less competition for our applicants. I think what we see in cycles past is people taking one of 2 approaches, either asking for more money than they think they actually need because they assume it's going to get whittled down in the evaluation process, or they're asking for less money than they think they need because they want to stay competitive. And so hopefully this would kind of remove some of that that sort of moving things around based on this perception of there being competition. It would also allow us to focus more on how that project meets our criteria versus how that project is lining up against whatever other projects are in the same cycle. I guess one of the potential downsides is that this would require pretty significant restructuring of how we're administering the program now. So that, that's a bit of work. It would also be it would mean that we would need to really make sure that our criteria are refined and that they are clear and that we're integrating that readiness piece in a way that's going to we're going to get applications for projects that are more ready to go, excuse me. It would also be a bigger ask of our screening committee, I think, both in terms of sort of asking them to be involved on a regular basis and potentially requiring a few more hours from them over the course of the year. So that's something we would want to consider as well. I'm happy to stop and take questions after each of these, or I can just kind of keep going and you can let me know.
going.
Okay. Thank you. Another idea that we have been discussing is the potential for allocating a certain amount of CET funds annually to the community placemaking grant program. The number that has been floating around is $250,000, which would, I think, more than double the amount of funding that is available to that program now. If you want to go to the next slide, please. This would allow some of those CET dollars to be funneled directly to smaller community-focused projects with less requirements, less strings attached, if you will. And this could be done while still sort of having good alignment with the goals of the 2040 grant program, particularly since some amendments to the Metro Code that were made in 2020 that added that community stabilization piece that Malou mentioned. It would also help the community placemaking grant program meet more of the demand for the program. I think their last cycle, they had a request for $1.8 million, and they had $200,000 to work with. So this would double the amount of money that they were able to distribute to these small community-focused projects. It may require some more staff support to make it happen if we're doubling their funding allocation. Next slide. So as Aaron and Malou mentioned, the grant program has evolved over time, and currently the grant rules do not allow grants to pay for local government staff time. We could consider refining that somewhat, either removing that restriction altogether or placing a cap, either like a total dollar amount or a percentage per project, so that a certain amount of funding could cover staff time. Next slide. Thanks. This would support more capacity for staff to both apply for grants and manage them if they receive one. So it gives them that flexibility that they have been asking us for. It does, as I mentioned, it does sort of change or refine a prior program update. I think that restriction on grants paying for local government staff time was done out of a concern about appropriate use of funds. But what we're finding is that our local government partners really need that additional support so that they have the capacity and the flexibility that they need to participate in this program.
Councilor Rosenthal, is it clarifying?
Yeah, clarifying question. You mentioned, is this the same as you mentioned the small short-term grants, which would almost have to be funding staff time? Is this the same, rolled into the same package, or is this a separate item?
It could be, you're talking about the quick response grants?
Yeah, the quick response.
Yeah,
I mean, you can't, that would have to be staff, that would probably have to be staff time, correct?
It could be. It could also be consultant time. You can bring on a consultant to do a quick project scoping work for you. So it could be either.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks. We're looking at doing some streamlining with the grant categories themselves. Right now there are 4. We just added a new one with this last grant cycle. But I think there's some real opportunity here for streamlining and really focusing down onto sort of the original 2, which is planning for areas outside the urban growth boundary, so planning for new urban areas, and then planning for projects inside the UGB. This gives us an opportunity to also refocus our criteria to make sure that the criteria are speaking directly to the intents of the program itself, and that they are clear and concise and easy for applicants to interpret and easy for our screening committee and staff to evaluate. Go ahead. Thank you. So, like I said, it sort of simplifies the application process, both for applicants, also for staff and our screening committee. And again, I think allows us to think about how to craft our criteria so that we're really bringing the focus back to the core intent of the program itself, while still maintaining the same types of projects that are eligible for these grants. So we're not talking about changing the types of projects that can be funded through this program. It's really just a matter of sort of shifting around and combining them in a way that hopefully simplifies the process for everybody. And again, it sort of rolls back some previous changes that have been made to the program. Just something to think about. I think this is the last one, yeah. So right now, the equitable development grant category has a requirement that applications have to come from a partnership between a local jurisdiction and a community partner. A community partner is pretty vaguely defined in our rules. It can be a CBO, it could be a nonprofit, it could be an organization, it can be a property owner, it can be a lot of things. And we have, now that this has been in place for a couple of cycles, the feedback that we're getting is that it is sometimes serving as a barrier to participating in the program because there isn't always an obvious or appropriate or available community partner for the project. And so jurisdictions are either not applying because of that, or they're kind of creating a community partner, sort of making one up in the hopes that it allows them to get in the door. So we would like to explore some ways to change this requirement, if not remove it altogether, at least refine it so that it provides a little bit more flexibility. Maybe we focus this requirement on larger projects that are potentially more impactful, or those that have a more direct tie to those low-income or BIPOC communities that were sort of the intended recipients of this requirement. I think we can approach this in a way that maintains the intent of the requirement, which is really to focus on these more equitable outcomes of this work, but we can add flexibility. So we're setting the criteria, we're setting we're saying here's what we want to see in terms of equitable outcomes, and we're really letting the applicant decide how they achieve that. And they're telling us this is how we're going to meet your criteria, rather than us telling them you're going to do it this way. Again, this is one that sort of revises a prior program update because I think it was an update in response to our strategic plan for EDI, but also there were some concerns about whether or not these projects were having the right kind of equity outcomes in their communities. So I think we can approach it in a way that maintains the intent, but gives a little bit more ability to shift around within that. The last piece is really, you can go to the next slide, thank you, is really about housekeeping. We would be exploring some changes to the administrative rules to allow the CET money to pay for Metro staff time that is spent on direct project support. So basically this would allow Metro staff to bill to the technical assistance code. Right now the rules allow consultant time to be covered by CET funds, but it's kind of silent on Metro staff time spent doing direct project support. So we'll be exploring some changes to the admin rules to reflect that. Oh, can you go back, please? Thanks. And then we'd like to also take a look at ways we can improve and enhance our sort of regular and consistent evaluation of the program itself, so that we can continue to serve our clients and continue to adjust and evolve as needed to meet the needs of the region. I think that's it. If you could go to the next slide. So what we're looking for, as Milou and Aaron mentioned, is your feedback on which of these ideas you would like us to further develop. And if there are any that you want us to take off the table, let us know. We will continue to refine those ideas that you want to move forward, and we'll come back to you with a proposal for program implementation, which will probably include some changes to the administrative rules, potentially the code, and our approaches in general. And we're looking at probably about 6 to 9 months, maybe a little bit longer, to really refine some of these ideas and get them in place.
Great,
Thanks.
thank you. Colleagues, Would love to have us have our discussion about those ideas presented and other ideas we might have. Counselor Rosenthal?
Thank you, Chair Lewis. I have just a couple questions, one comment. Well, first of all, I'm a little, I wouldn't say I'm concerned overly, but the idea of Metro staff time, I guess I'd like more clarification. How would that be controlled? In other words, would it have to require, in other words, for Metro staff time to be accounted to some of these grants, would it have to be a specific request from the grantee as to a certain amount of time, and how do we track that? I could see that that could be a little bit of a slippery slope. That's some concern I have. And then you mentioned in one of the slides something about the UGB. Now, all of these grants apply only to inside the UGB, or do they apply to undesignated areas?
The grant program supports both planning for urban reserves that are coming,
Okay.
that are proposed to come into the growth boundaries. We call that concept planning. That
Right.
happens before a UGB decision, and then also can support development or planning projects inside the growth boundary.
Yeah, but what about undesignated areas?
We can't currently plan for undesignated areas. We'd have to follow the same rules that apply, which I might get this right, which is that you have to, we first look at urban reserves, and once, I think it's 75% of the urban reserves within a county have been used up, then we can look at undesignated lands. And I think that that same rule would apply to us providing grant funding for our partners. Did I answer that correctly, Carrie?
You did answer that correctly.
Okay.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
Can I address your first question, which is about Metro staff time? Just like our local partners are telling us that they do not have, that they're having a hard time applying for grants, we don't always have enough staff capacity to be able to work with our local partners on these grants. And I hear I think that the concern of a slippery slope is something that we could address to be sure that there is not a slope there and that we're very clearly focused on providing the service that our grantees need to be able to collectively be effective in delivering on the scope of the grant.
My assumption is staff is generally pretty busy just monitoring these grants and things like that, so it might require a budget addition to add a specific staff person who can work on all these various grants and dedicate their staff time and then, allocate it according to the different projects. I'm not sure exactly how we would do that. I mean, because as you point out, we don't have staff just sitting around twiddling their thumbs ready to go out there. I mean, this is there's some issues here about where you allocate your time.
It has been existing practice for our planners to be assigned to provide technical assistance. So for many, many years, we've been providing this kind of technical assistance, not just asking for invoices and making sure they get paid, but actually being on a project team, attending technical advisory committee meetings, providing, a lot of our TOD staff, for example, provide their expertise to planning processes, so that particularly when it's a site-specific analysis to help encourage development on a site, they use their expertise working with developers to provide advice and technical assistance. So it is something that we have been doing for quite some time.
Right, yeah, I understand, but now we're creating a separate category or a separate, might say, billing structure for additional work in the same regard. And so it's a question of, so does that mean staff would no longer be available on, no longer assign staff other than if we have a specific code program for them? In other words, you see what I'm saying? You're creating sort of two structures. We've done it historically. We send people out to meetings and we provide them technical assistance, and it's part of just what we do. Now we're creating a separate category.
I think this change, we called it a housekeeping change because it really just is a housekeeping change about how we account for and address with the program this work that we're already doing. So it wouldn't be a significant change for staff. It's just sort of cleaning up a process that we're already doing.
For example, the Center for Tribal Nations, which was one of the awards green lighted last week, we sent 3 staff to regular meetings. None of them coded their time towards this program.
Right.
So we had TOD, we had planning, we had tribal relations, all showing up with their expertise on top of the support that they got from the grant administration team. And none of that was reflected out of this budget line. It's all coming out of
Correct.
their general fund. So the question to us is, do we want to have them supported on that time from this fund? It's not about, do we want them to show up to those meetings or not? They're already doing that.
Right, no, I understand. We would still have them show up to the meetings. It's a question of how we allocate their time and whether it comes out of the grant or it comes out of our existing staff time, which has something to do with our internal budgets. So.
Hey, Councilor Wong?
Yeah, thank you, Deputy President Lewis, and thanks for all these suggestions. Kind of just looking through them all, I see that we're hoping to streamline the grant programs from 4 to new urban area planning and planning inside the UGB. So I kind of view those as, one might be inside the UGB, like an OMSI district or something like that. And the other category is looking at potentially developable land along the UGB and planning for that to increase, access to housing, or something like that. Am I understanding that clearly? Okay. So I think, just some of my initial thoughts for the UGB planning, I think I would be open to supporting like local government staff time, especially around for the smaller jurisdictions. And you understand there's probably a big difference between some of our suburban partners and, the Bureau of Planning at the City of Portland. So that staff time probably is needed to really look at, those kinds of planning processes. So I'm okay with that. I think having flexibility engagement is okay. I don't like when people make up community partnerships, but how do we ensure that our equity goals are still front and center, and making sure that folks that might be most impacted can have a role, but I don't think we have to require a nonprofit that works with community if one doesn't exist there, and we don't want to create kind of like transactional relationships. And I was wondering if we could also maybe think a bit more about how different programs could collaborate, a little more closely. And, oftentimes if there's not like a CBO, there might be creatives or artists that work, in that area. So that might be an opportunity of like potential collaboration where, if we're supporting placemaking grants, more deeply, that could be connected to some of the 2040 planning grants. I think we see that, take place kind of organically, but, that might be a way to facilitate additional community engagement on some of the, I guess, more dispersed potential applications. And also kind of just thinking about, collaboration more deeply, like OMSI District is a great example of 2040 planning grants, complex community visions, potentially like housing dollars in the future if we have those. So just, how are we kind of layering on those levels of support? But otherwise, I think, these changes make a lot of sense.
Thank you for those good ideas.
Councilor Gonzalez?
Thanks, Deputy President Lewis. I want to echo Councilor Huang's comments around the partnership requirement and finding a way to reframe that to make community engagement and involvement show up in a way that's not necessarily a requirement, from personal experience and also from feedback that we've gotten. It's just that it can create tension, issues with capacity, things like that. And so I think wherever we can avoid that transactional relationship is always really good. A few questions. Can you remind us, I was looking through the slides real quick and I don't think it mentioned, but the usual grant cycle is how much money?
It has varied. Most recent grant cycles, the total funding varied between like 2.5 and 3 million. When the program first started, it was a little bit higher, but when the program first started, we were doing grants like every 3 years and not every year. So since it's been on an annual cycle, about 2.5 to 3 million.
And I
Okay,
recently
awesome.
saw our
Thanks.
projections, we're projecting about 3 million per year in the future.
Right. So thank you for that. I wanna latch on to the point on the staff time funding because I hear what, Counselor Rosenthal is sharing, and I somewhat agree, especially, we've offered this kind of service on behalf of Metro to the region, and now, we're gonna air quotes charge for it. So it's like something is free, it now has a cost. But also it's important to, realize and allocate existing costs to the appropriate source. And I think for the last 5 years, the council has really, asked, urged, encouraged the planning and development team to find more resources and more, greater ability to offer technical assistance to partners. So there's an inherent tension there. Um, I guess as you explore this concept further, I would want to know, if we were to, bill or find a way to recover the FTE allocations that we make to projects, then where does that bottom line then get reinvested into either more TA or into more areas if we have the ability, to do that, or if it will help us make more grants. And in general, I know that for these grants that go out into the smaller cities and jurisdictions outside of Portland, the budgets are usually pretty tight as is. So I am worried about being able to do less when we're out in our district. So again, there's a whole lot of different things there, but just sharing where I'm coming from. Lastly, one of the things that I would love to see, and I thought we would see, is a connection to some of this like strategic planning that the council has been doing on the cyclical basis around housing, jobs, climate in those areas, and finding ways where our different grant opportunities can really support each other and coalesce and aggregate. Uh, so if there's something that you could do in that area and kind of try and frame it through that, I would really welcome that recommendation, and it would be nice. But in general, this program I think has been very helpful to our partners. One of the things that I know has been a big requirement um, and exclusion has been that these grant funds are intended to support new planning, but can't backfill existing planning budgets, which I understand is a crux of the policy. Uh, so I think we know from some of the statewide research and some of the things that we hear from our partners that planning departments are really hurting in terms of capacity, budgets, ability to fill those positions. And I'm not necessarily arguing for us to, use these funds to do that, but I do think there's like an interesting window and a question to ask around climate-friendly, equitable communities and the additional work that our partners are doing. And although it's new but existent anyway, I think there's something to say about that too. um, and so I'm just kind of again throwing all my ideas and thoughts that I've had around this for a while, but I really appreciate that you're bringing this to us, that we're getting to sink our teeth into it. And I think that the projects that we funded and the partners that have requested funds it's a really valuable grant program. So I appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts. Thanks.
If I could respond, I wanted to I have something to say and then Sarah has something to say. I wanted to point out that in our conversation, in terms of staff time, and the kind of work that cities need to do, we heard and out visiting planning directors that several cities and counties need to really look at their codes. It can be pretty boring work to do an omnibus code update, but that they feel like they're gonna find more efficiency in the use of their existing staff, as well as provide, remove barriers and make it easier for developers when they come in for permits, if they were able to spend time updating their code. We think that the rules around this program, the existing rules around this program allow funds to be used that way, but that by expanding their ability to use grant funds to support their local staff time, that they could do more of that work with this program. So in part, we are trying to focus on our ability to help local planning departments do the work that local planning departments do, but better and more efficient. And then you mentioned CFAC in particular, so I just wanted to point out that we do have the 17 grants that you endorsed last week. One of them is specifically to address, help the city address their CFAC requirements. That's in the city of Gresham. And so our grant currently allows for that kind of work. So we might just need to promote it, and perhaps providing, again, ability for local staff to use some of that for their staff time might increase the number of applicants for that kind of work.
Okay, we'll go, Counselor Rosenthal, I think you've already gone, so I'm gonna go Counselor Nolan.
Oh, okay, thanks, Madam President. Two things. One question about, let me see. Now go ahead, Counselor Rosenthal, it'll come back to me.
Let's land that plane, yeah. Counselor Rosenthal.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, first of all, I want to say that I think that the proposed changes are good. I mean, the communities in my district have been very happy with these grants and have used them. There will be a tendency, if we can charge our time, they'll want to use our time as consultants, but I think that's just something we'll have to deal with. I just have a specific question. Since the recent court case in LCDC, has Clackamas County shown any interest in asking for a grant to do something with the Stafford Triangle? Because that's now a significant issue, and that's sort of been hanging out there for a long time. We went from the 5-party to the 3-party, and now we're back to we're involved. And so it's been suggested that they're the ones that should go ahead and work on this. And I've talked to some of the local people about that, and it seems, I'm just curious if they are.
We haven't yet been contacted with a conversation about planning for the Stafford area.
Okay.
But for the record, they had a grant and they applied for 5 extensions before it expired.
That was,
It was years ago.
yeah, years ago,
But
right,
we have shown willingness to give a grant, and in fact,
right.
when they kept asking for extensions, we said, please ask for more money, not less. We are not at fault here.
No, I'm not saying we're at fault. I'm just wondering if they've shown renewed interest now that the situation has been somewhat resolved.
Counselor Nolan, did you?
Yes, Madam President. I just want to put into the conversation a concern, and I understand about different buckets of money, but if local jurisdictions, local cities can't afford to plan for growth, do we vet their capacity to front the costs of infrastructure to actually support that growth? Or are we giving money to people to plan who then don't have the capacity to follow through?
I think that's a great question. Our concept planning also includes an infrastructure funding plan. Do you want to talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that this fund is to help plan. That's what it was born to do, and that's what it's done for all of these years. And it is not implementation money. It is not meant to be spent on infrastructure and building. However, we recognize this important piece of development, particularly in expansion areas. So that's why we have requirements within a concept plan, that concept plan include local plans for how they're gonna fund infrastructure. And that is an important piece of what they need to work on and think about before coming for a UGB expansion request.
If I might clarify that, that's during the planning process, should we make them a grant? And I appreciate that. I was asking if we do any vetting in advance for a capacity and willingness to raise the funds to provide infrastructure in the area, because, I mean, I start from the assumption that none of this stuff happens for free. Roads cost money to build, sewers cost money to build, parks cost money to set aside. Is there any vetting in advance about that, or?
Thanks for the clarification. No, there's not, but I think there's a recognition that this process, the concept planning process, is the vetting process. It is what they have to do to work with their neighbors, with their community members, with financial experts to help them figure that out. And what our local communities told us was that we need the financial support to do that work, and that's what this concept planning is meant to do. And the requirements then just set the expectations for what they're going to work on so that they have these products when they finish, including a finance plan for their infrastructure. But it recognizes that it takes time and effort and money to support that work, and so that's the way the program fills that need.
Okay, thanks.
Great. So I guess I'll take some time to think through my response. I'm broadly supportive of everything. I'm extremely supportive of community placemaking, receiving funds. 250 is a good starting point, and we should put a point in time in which we reevaluate that number based off of success of using that for additional capacity. I do think in terms of local staff time, as they're implementing and monitoring the grant, working with consultants, we should absolutely be supportive of their staff time up to a certain percentage of the total grants. And I would leave it to staff to give us that cap, but it definitely seems double-digit worthy. In terms of staff time ourselves, I would be supportive of a bank. So for each fiscal year, have a certain amount that we could bill up to, and when it's billed up to, it's done for the year. But that will give us both the way to recognize the immense amount of work that goes into supporting some of these community proposals, but also not overspend. I guess finally, when I think through enhancing ways of community engagement and how it shows up in this grant, I'm not sure I would characterize community having made up organization. I think sometimes community struggles with an organization that is able to actually accept dollars of this size. And I would still like there to be a way in which community can come forward and apply for a grant as the primary applicant. Yes, requiring a local government to sign on. But I think if we just look at flexibility in the way that was described, we might lose that ability for particularly well-networked, organized folks in unincorporated areas who are interested in the kind of urban development that we're interested in seeing happen. I think we lose the ability for them to show up. I have a couple of questions I'd like to think through for this program. But what do we do right now regarding review for the agency's goals for each of the plans along either our tribal affairs goals or our strategic plan to advance DEI? Do we do a comparison? Do we do any sort of check on those plans? When somebody submits a grant, do we hold it up against those plans?
Is it part of the evaluation process?
Mm-hmm.
It is worked into some of our criteria. Sarah, maybe you can help.
We have criteria about equity in the process and equitable outcomes. As we were talking, you know, it is, the criteria are, I think, somewhat vague and difficult to meet or to demonstrate how you're going to meet them. They've been challenging to work with, but there isn't like a direct link to our EDI strategy or our, you know, tribal policies in the way that I think you're asking. Not currently.
Yeah, I mean, I would be interested in a way to add that to the review process. Not to complicate things, but I could think a stop at core might be worthy. I could also see adding to the review table folks from both tribal affairs and DEI within our organization to make sure that those policies are brought into the review. And I guess my last question is, how would a sovereign nation, in terms of a tribal government, work with us on these grants? I know they've had some success in our current round, but looking forward to the revamp, would we be able to do anything specifically calling out how tribes could work with Metro on these grants?
Under the kind of the current rules, the grants, I think it's kind of, again, a little bit vague. I think the history and the intent of the program is that these grants go directly to cities and counties and Metro's boundary. But there have been a handful of exceptions to that where grants have gone directly to nonprofits, OMSI, Craft 3, AVT. So I think what I'm hearing you say is you would like for us to explore ways to allow grants to go directly to a community-based organization or a tribal entity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not conflating the two. One is a
Understood.
government, one
Yeah.
is an organization.
Yeah. I think if a tribal entity were to apply for a grant now, the language in the rules is all cities and counties, cities and counties, cities and counties. So by the letter of the rule, they wouldn't have that ability. But I think that there are ways to update the rules so that they could. So that's, if we can explore that.
That'd be great. At least 3 tribes own significant parcels of land within the UGB. And I think it would be appropriate for us to make our rules clear and not leave question marks on that. Thank you. Councilor Nolan?
Thank you, Madam President. In a much smaller way of including stakeholders, have you engaged the taxpayers about these these proposed changes, by which I mean the folks who pay the tax? Since it's my understanding, both from my own history that's getting a little dusty, but what you said today, that the source of these funds, the excise tax, was a collaboration with the home building industry in order to provide services that were of value to us, but candidly also to them. So have you talked with them about their feelings about changes to how the funds would be used?
We've done some initial conversations with organizations that represent those interests, including the Home Builders Association of Portland, of Greater Portland.
Great.
And we met with, Andy stepped out, a real estate group whose name is not coming to my mind right away, but we did try to do that work by reaching out with some of the organizations. And in general, the response has been that they've been happy with the way the grant program is going, and there just seems to be a much general support and less criticism than maybe the program had early in its existence.
Great. I just believe that when we enter into an activity on a basis of collaboration, we should make efforts to sustain the collaboration and to engage the people who went into it in partnership with us, as a matter of not provoking opposition later, but also as a matter of good faith on behalf of a government. Thanks.
Councilor Wong?
Thank you. Just kind of building upon the kind of criteria for our selections with, the strategy on racial equity and working with tribal partners. We're also doing, the whole organization and agency here is doing strategic target setting, as well as kind of creating, more of a North Star for our region. And I really do see how the 2040 planning grants, plays a role in advancing that. So I think as you're kind of thinking about the revamping and like how you talk about the program, like how do the 2040 planning grants fit into kind of our broader strategic targets, and I think it does, play a substantial role in housing and things like that. So just, as we rethink and adapt our various programs, like how are we all working together to advance that singular vision? Thanks.
Councilor Rosenthal?
Thanks, and I just wanted to second what you said, and I think what I heard was you're requesting them to come back to us with potential criteria changes that would tie our review process more strongly in with our DEI policies to make sure that that is front-loaded, possibly also with some of our climate issues if it's possible, but just to come back to us with some suggestions for any potential criteria changes in that regard. And I just wanted to second what Councilor Lewis mentioned.
Thank you.
Third.
I think we've got support. Come back and give us, I threw out some creative ideas, but you've got the expertise to actually make it real.
Yeah, thank you. This is very, very exciting to work on and bring you back some specific suggestions.
Wonderful. Well, I think you've got direction. I think we've got time to meet together in the future. Let's stay in touch, and thank you so much for this work.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
And with that, we will move on to the next item on our agenda, our COO Communications, Marisa Madrigal.
Good morning, and thank you, Deputy Council President Lewis, and good morning, councilors. I have two items for you today. One is just a heads up that our budget process has already begun. And my team and I are currently working on one of the first steps in that process, which is determining the level of service and cost of our central services. And just wanted to give you some situational awareness going into our, when we deliver our forecast to you, that we are seeing increased costs kind of across the board. We knew that there were going to be some increased costs due to pay equity, which is a good thing. But as you might recall, to correct pay equity in our system and within the law, you can only bring people up. You cannot push people down, which I agree with, but it does add costs. And then we're also seeing increases in costs for things like insurance, healthcare, and so don't have yet an assessment on, the cumulative impact of those things, but wanted to just, keep you updated in real time. And then we really look forward to having our forecast conversation with you as we start to kick off your official discussions about the budget. So that is item one. Item two is I just wanted to make you aware, you may or may not be aware that TriMet has in the recent past expressed interest in locating an operations and maintenance facility at Expo. This is separate from anything that would happen with the I-5 bridge project. This is an additional large facility. And frankly, that additional large facility is not compatible with our current use or with our future uses, hope-for uses at Expo. And so there's never been a formal request to Metro for use of that property for that purpose, but there's been discussions, and so I will be communicating with my counterpart at TriMet this week, just with a letter clearly saying this isn't compatible, and we encourage you to look for alternatives. So I just wanted to share that with you all, and I'll let you know if anything comes of it. But as I said, there's never been anything formal, but there's enough sort of chatter about it that I felt it was important to really state clearly what our hopes and aspirations are for the site, but also that idea is not compatible with even what we currently do there. So that's all. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Counselors, any questions for Marisa? Hearing none, let's move on to our own council communications agenda item. Don't all speak at once? Well, I will go. Oh, Counselor Wong.
Oh, might be on the same topic, but last week, excuse me, we had the opportunity to attend the gathering, the annual gala for the Northwest Native Chamber. It was a amazing, fun event with performances and fashion show and some of the best food I've had at an event. And the next day I also was able to attend a happy hour for the OMSI district. And I think just a lot of joy and momentum and work and excitement around the Center for Tribal Nations.
Wonderful. Counselor Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chair Lewis. First, two things. One, the Westside Multimodal Improvement Study program is going well. We're meeting in about a week or two to review the latter part of two scenarios. There's been 5 in total, kind of looking to evaluate mobility, the kind of projects, I mean, the whole gamut that you could think about, and doing some really exciting modeling, essentially, is what I'm trying to get at here. So just want to keep you all up to speed on that, and I'm hopeful to be providing a more detailed update. And I know that we have some files that I would love to check in with you about. So if you can, if we can make a 5 to 10 minutes to talk through those, I would appreciate that. Second is that this upcoming Friday, Metro is supporting / sponsoring a webinar with 1,000 Friends of Oregon on California's infrastructure bank, which is, again, I think relevant to the 2040 conversation that we had today in terms of the different public financing, municipal financing tools that governments use down in California to pay for things and planning all those development, basically everything that we talked about today. So if you're able to join it, I encourage you to do so. It's at 12. It's again, it's a webinar, so a brown bag webinar, I guess you could say. Take a lunch, and yeah, that's it for me.
Great. Colleagues, I just want to report that yesterday the Supportive Housing Services Oversight Committee had, I believe it was their 31st meeting, and it was a good meeting. It was a little bit of a shorter agenda than they're used to, but one of the important things was it was the first monitoring update for the corrective action plan at Multnomah County. There is a new report template that we will see out of any county that has a corrective action plan with only a 1-month lag, which in government, only 1-month lag is like real time. And it showed the progress to date, the progress to date as of September 1st. And the work that Multnomah County is doing is not only given in qualitative update, but also a quick look shows things that are coded green for having met, yellow for in progress, or red for at risk. Multnomah County has completed 6, so 6 greens, a whole bunch of yellow with good progress, and 2 items at risk. So relatively good progress and good job to the staff, Metro and Multnomah County, for agreeing to this template. And we will see it every month going forward at the Oversight Committee level. Additionally, wanted to say thank you to Georgia and our council office for supporting the Willamette Falls Locks Authority in our local government tours yesterday. We had 20 people down at the locks from across the region, mayors, city councilors, leadership at the port. And it was a really good day. It was like the perfect day. We got to see construction. We didn't have any rain. It wasn't too hot. And Georgia helped make it happen. So thank you. With that, I see no more discussion. Council, do you have anything? No, you don't want to bend our ear? Our next regular meeting
Councilor
is.
Lewis?
Oh, yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I was just raising my hand here. I mean, I would love for us to go out to the locks as a council sometime soon too. It looked great. The photos looked awesome. I'd love the opportunity to go with you and
Yeah, absolutely. We will be doing more of those tours. Our next regular meeting is scheduled for Thursday, October 26th at 10:30 a.m. With that, meeting adjourned. Have a great day.